The son of Renata Flavio became very sick and needed surgery. Renata was a mother by herself. The same disease had killed her husband 2 years prior. Their 8-year-old kid was devastated by the loss at the time. He had been inherited with the condition and became unwell himself a few months ago. Renata was now fighting for her son's life with all her might. He was the only child she had. Renata was already married. She was only 18 and had recently completed her education. She had been captivated by her future husband's good looks. In their small village, Renata herself was well known for her beauty. She had large brown eyes and long black hair, making her a very pretty female. The males all came after her, but she kept them all at bay since she didn't think any of them were good enough for her. Indeed, Renata detested everyone and turned them away with her aloofness and coldness. She didn't have many pals. Her career path deviated from the predictions that she would become an actor, singer, or model. Renata fell in love with Javier the moment she laid eyes on him. The youngster also captured the heart of the man who was 17 years her senior. After a month of a passionate romance, they declared their engagement. They had an extravagant wedding a month later. Being a rich man, Javier made sure the ceremony was lavish. It was all playing out like a lovely fairy tale. After returning from their island getaway, the newlyweds were even happier and more in love. Almost immediately after becoming pregnant, Renata gave birth to a handsome baby. She was content, but she had to put her career aside. She cherished her position as a mother and a wife. She was loved by her hubby. He put in a lot of labor, and his business paid well. Renata wanted to try something different after their boy grew up and aged 4. She considered training to become an artist because she had always loved painting. Renata began taking painting classes to get ready for tests and enroll in college after her husband didn't object. Everything was going smoothly. She had a bright future, according to the teachers, who applauded her. After enrolling in college, Renata joyfully threw herself into her studies. She now had a husband who loved her, a child, a house, and a job that fulfilled her dreams. Renata was content and joyful every day. Her lack of friends was the only thing that made her a little depressed. Because Renata and her husband had relocated to the capital as soon as they were married, her school classmates resided far away. The other girls in her group were younger, and Renata didn't know what to talk to them about. Besides, she still behaved quite reserved and aloof. Of course, her son went to school, but even there, she couldn't make friends with the other mothers. They had completely different interests. However, Renata wasn't too desperate. All her time was devoted to family and creativity. In her final year, she was offered a job. After defending her diploma, she was ready to be accepted as a painting teacher in a children's art studio. After consulting with Javier, Renata agreed. She would have her own business and her own income, which she could spend as she pleased. How could it get any better? Renata looked forward to the future with joy and anticipation. And then the unexpected happened. Javier fell seriously ill. All the money he had saved for a new house and expanding his business had to be spent on treatment, but it didn't help. Javier faded away like the flame of a thin burning candle. Renata couldn't believe what was happening. In less than 6 months, Javier went from being a young, flourishing man to a feeble old man. Doctors couldn't do anything. Javier passed away. Renata bitterly mourned the loss. She never took her exams or defended her diploma. She had to quickly find a job to support her son. Her parents helped as much as they could, but Renata didn't want to depend on them. She understood that she was alone, and now all the responsibility for her son lay on her shoulders. A year passed, and she managed to somewhat improve their financial situation. She had enough money to pay bills and her son's school fees, buy clothes for him, and even go to the movies on weekends, to children's entertainment centers, amusement parks, and the zoo. Life was slowly getting back on track. Renata even started painting again, indulging in it during her free time. The wound left by her husband's death still hadn't healed in her heart. She loved him very much. She poured all her pain, loneliness, and unexpressed emotions into paintings of profound depth. Everyone who saw them promised Renata a great future, speaking of her talent. She was already thinking about her own exhibitions when suddenly a new misfortune struck. Flavio fell ill. Renata felt horror. She was afraid that history would repeat itself and that the boy would also leave her forever. She knew she wouldn't survive another loss. The doctors said they would do everything they could, but they couldn't avoid surgery. A lot of money was needed to make it happen. Renata found a second job, But it still wasn't enough. So she started selling the things her husband had given her. They were golden decorations that were dear to her as memories. She would never part with them under different circumstances. But now she had no choice. Moreover, Renata reached out to her former college professors, asking them to find buyers for her paintings. They empathized with her situation and promised to help. It wasn't even a week before a fairly wealthy patron called Renata and bought all of her paintings. The girl was very grateful to him, but the money collected still wasn't enough. Renata was on the verge of despair and put her house up for sale. Every day she visited Flavio. The hospital where he was located was only a couple of blocks away from her workplace. So as soon as she said goodbye to her last client, she grabbed her bag and walked to her son. Once right in front of the hospital, she stopped at a traffic light and noticed an old lady nearby. She was trying to cross the road on a red light. Apparently, the grandmother was very old and didn't understand what she was doing. Perhaps her relatives were already looking for her. Renata approached closer and asked loudly, "Do you need help?" The old lady looked at her, and Renata noticed tears in her eyes. "I got lost," she admitted. "My granddaughter and I went to the store, and she asked me to wait in the car, but she was gone for so long that I got worried and went to look for her. And then I ended up here. I need to find my granddaughter." Renata took the old lady by the arm, and when the light turned green, led her across the street. "What was the name of that store?" "Oh, I don't remember anymore. Some big one. There was such a bright shop window." Renata thought that maybe it was the huge supermarket on the corner and led the old lady there. As they approached the store, the girl immediately noticed a young woman darting around the parking lot, wringing her hands and calling out a name. Maybe that's the old lady's granddaughter, Renata thought. She led the grandmother to the girl. Seeing them, she stopped and smiled joyfully. "Abella, there you are. Where did you go? I've been looking for you for half an hour." The old lady smiled sheepishly like a mischievous girl. "I was there," she said, waving her hand in the direction they came from. "I hope you didn't cross the road on a red light." The old lady put on an innocent face. "No, of course not, sweetheart. This young beauty here helped me a lot." The girl thanked Renata, and she smiled and nodded in return. Handing over the old lady to her granddaughter, the young woman hurried to the hospital. Flavio must have been waiting for her by now. Renata didn't know that someone had been watching her closely all this time. When the girl reached the hospital and entered the building, he waited a little and followed Renata. The next day, the young woman had a day off, her first in months. She didn't want to take it, but her boss, an elderly gray-haired man named Senor Gonzalez, insisted. "If you keep working at the same pace, you'll end up in the hospital bed next to your son. Is that what you want?" he asked sternly when Renata came to hand him some documents. The girl shook her head. "Then please make sure I don't see you in these walls tomorrow. Go for a walk in the park or read a book. And don't even think about taking an extra shift at your second job. I'll find out." Senor Gonzalez was a kind and fair leader. He sympathized with the young woman, knowing her story. Senor Gonzalez himself had lost his wife early and never recovered from the loss. He was still lonely and spent almost all his time at work. However, he didn't want the same fate for Renata. The next day, the girl woke up at 10. Fatigue was taking its toll. She got up and went to the kitchen to make herself some coffee. The hospital's admission hour started in the afternoon and lasted until the evening, so the young woman didn't have to rush and could dedicate a few hours to herself. However, she couldn't stop thinking about poor Flavio, who missed her terribly in the hospital and kept asking his mom, "When can I come home?" "Soon, my little one." "Soon," Renata reassured him, though her heart was breaking with sorrow. She did her best to hold herself together and not show her son that she was afraid of losing him. Flavio had to believe, and she had to convey her confidence to him. It would give him the strength to fight the illness. Renata repeated these words to herself again and again. Despite everything, she had to believe. "And I won't die like Dad?" Flavio asked again. Renata, leaning towards him, gently kissed him on the forehead and shook her head. "No, of course not," she said. "You will live for a very, very long time." "And what will I be when I grow up?" the boy asked, his eyes sparkling. It was their favorite game. Renata had long known that he dreamed of becoming a football player. "You will play for our country and set a world record for the most goals scored." This was the answer the boy expected to hear every time. When Renata replied, his face lit up in a wide, happy smile, and he fell asleep peacefully. Renata slowly left the room, holding back tears, and went home. She knew it would happen again today and tomorrow, and it gave some stability to her shaky world. If only I could sell the house and raise the remaining amount for the surgery, Renata thought. She waited every minute for calls from buyers, but there were none. Of course, the house was expensive and located in a very prestigious area, yet Renata hoped that buyers would come very soon. At that moment, as she was thinking about it, sipping coffee from a white porcelain cup, she heard the sound of a message. The girl even jumped in surprise and eagerly reached for the phone. "Please let it be the buyers," she whispered quietly. The number from which the message came was unfamiliar to her. Renata began to read it, and when she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. She closed her eyes, and memories of her youth whirled around her in a whirlwind of bright images from the distant past. She was 17 when she first saw this modest red-haired boy. His family had recently moved to their town, and he was the new kid in Renata's class. When he awkwardly entered the classroom, all eyes turned to him. He had an open and simple face with freckles, and he limped. The limp was a result of a childhood injury, as Renata later found out. "Meet Rafael Silvio. He will now study in our class," the old teacher, Senora Sanchez, introduced the boy. She was very kind and cheerful, and she wanted the kids to accept Rafael into their group. "Sit in the third row by the window, Rafael," the teacher said. "There's an empty seat next to Renata." Renata always sat alone because her friends, equally beautiful and popular girls like her, were in another class. She had no friends among her classmates, and Renata didn't allow anyone to sit with her. Having heard what Senora Sanchez said, the girl raised her chin and said gracefully, "No, he won't sit here." The girl thought Senora Sanchez wouldn't respond and would simply seat the boy elsewhere. But the teacher unexpectedly got angry, which was unlike her. "If I said Rafael will sit here, then he will," the teacher said firmly. Renata flared up and turned to the window. Rafael, red as a tomato, walked down the aisle and plopped heavily onto the chair next to her, accidentally bumping her elbow. "Could you be more careful?" Renata hissed, moving away from the boy as much as possible. "Sorry," he replied, and to her surprise, she noticed he had a very pleasant, low voice. He began taking out battered textbooks from his backpack, apparently handed down to him from an older sibling. Then he placed a notebook and a pencil case with pens and pencils in front of him and attentively listened to the teacher. When it was time to take notes on new material, he carefully tipped the pen in his left hand and began writing. Renata involuntarily glanced at his notebook. Rafael had very beautiful, calligraphic handwriting. Renata raised her eyebrows in surprise but said nothing. When the bell rang for recess, she stood up abruptly, causing the boy to almost jump in place. He was in a hurry to let the girl pass and was so clumsy that he bumped into the desk several times while leaving. Renata just pursed her lips and, raising her head high, left the classroom. She found her friends and vividly recounted the humiliation she had to endure because of the newcomer. "And what about him? Is he at least cute?" Clara, one of Renata's friends, asked indifferently. "He's an eyesore, plain and simple," Renata snorted. "Red-haired, freckled, clumsy, and to top it off, lame. Lucky me, huh?" The girls chuckled. "You're not jealous of her, that's for sure," one of them teased. At that moment, the bell rang and Renata went back to class. The redhead was still sitting in his usual place, leaning low over the desk. Renata noticed he was drawing something in his notebook. Catching sight of the girl, he awkwardly stood up again and let her pass. Passing by her seat, Renata quickly glanced at the boy's drawing. He had drawn a wolf with a simple pencil. Renata noted that the wolf looked lifelike. She already loved drawing at that time, but she had never been able to achieve such similarity. The girl looked at her red-haired neighbor with a new perspective, but said nothing. Her royal position, accustomed to by her and the other kids, didn't allow her to show friendly feelings towards someone like Rafael. However, he didn't know that. He liked the girl at first sight. In math, a subject he never liked, Rafael opened a clean sheet in his notebook and, glancing sideways, carefully looked at Renata's profile. He sketched her features on the sheet: a slightly pointed nose, big eyes, long eyelashes, a neat chin, beautifully arched eyebrows, and long black hair. The portrait turned out to be more than similar to the original, and a satisfied Rafael signed it at the bottom. Then he tore the sheet from the notebook and placed it in front of Renata. She looked at the drawing in surprise. She immediately recognized herself in it, and the portrait flattered her greatly. However, the girl remained silent. Once again, Raphael wrote on a clean sheet of paper. "Do you like it?" Renata replied, "Am I that ugly? You draw worse than a 5-year-old." She realized Raphael was upset after reading her words, yet she felt not an ounce of guilt. That's how you should treat people like him. Let him know his place, she thought. She was accustomed to treating guys like this. However, Raphael wasn't giving up. The next day, he brought a bouquet of daisies to school with a note and placed it on Renata's desk. She read the words, beautifully written. "The beauty of these flowers cannot compare to yours." Classmates whispered and pointed at Renata and Raphael. Blushing with embarrassment, Renata tossed the bouquet out of the open window and defiantly looked at Raphael. He sadly smiled but remained silent. They spent the whole day again sitting next to each other without saying a word. The next day, it repeated. They sat in complete silence once more. During literature class, Renata's pen suddenly stopped working, and Raphael noticed. He handed his pen to her. She didn't want to take it, but she had no choice. Her grades in that subject were not great, and Renata didn't want to worsen the situation by not taking the test. After class, Raphael waited for Renata at the school's entrance. Renata came out with her friends and pretended not to know him. Raphael, limping, blocked their way. "Can I walk you home?" he bravely asked, only looking at Renata. She crossed her arms and shook her head. "No way." "Are you blind? I'm walking home with my friends," she replied challengingly. Raphael nodded and limped away. He watched the giggling girls for a long time. "He's so strange," Clara said, and Renata nodded. "Is he in love with you?" Pilar, the girl with the long bangs, asked. "Definitely," Renata confirmed grimly. "Oh my, you couldn't find a better knight in shining armor," the friends exclaimed, and Renata groaned in response. "Stop laughing at me. You should pity me. I have to sit with him at the same desk." Saying this, she remembered Raphael's wonderful drawings, and she felt a bit ashamed of her harsh words. But she quickly dismissed the thought. "No one dares to approach Renata Martinez," she proudly declared aloud, especially someone like him. And then something happened. It was Sunday, and Renata went to the park to meet her friends. The hot, windless day was nearing sunset. The girls spread a blanket and lay on it, lazily sipping lemonade through colorful straws. Suddenly, Renata noticed Raphael. He was limping, strolling through the park. In his hands, he held a sketchbook and a pencil case with pencils. The boy sat on a bench near the fountain and began to draw. Renata's friends also noticed the redhead and started laughing. Renata asked them to stop, but they didn't calm down. Renata stood up and left, saying on the way that they were no longer her friends. They fell silent, startled by her reaction. Renata didn't want to go home. She walked deeper into the park, where there was an old cinema, and bought a ticket for the evening show. The movie was very romantic, and at the end, when the main character died, leaving his young wife to mourn him, Renata cried. Deep down, she was very sentimental. At that time, she didn't know that fate would make her go through something similar in real life. Leaving the theater, Renata took a deep breath of the warm evening air filled with the scent of flowers. Throwing a scarf over her shoulders, she went home. She didn't know that Raphael was also at the movies and was now following her. The girl had never returned home alone so late before. She used to always be with her friends. She felt very uncomfortable and, deciding to take a shortcut, turned onto an unfamiliar street, which was also poorly lit. Renata's steps echoed loudly in the silence. People in their town went to bed early. She could hear her heart beating loudly. Suddenly, a huge black dog jumped out of the bushes and, growling at the girl, bared its sharp teeth. Renata stopped in fear. The dog barked loudly. The girl felt a sticky fear gripping her entire being. Since childhood, she had been terribly afraid of dogs. The dog lunged at her feet when suddenly something hit it on the head. Renata was surprised to see that it was her familiar pencil case. She turned around, limping. Raphael was hurrying towards her, his eyes feverishly gleaming in the darkness. The dog growled again. It seemed the blow from the pencil case had angered it. Raphael shielded Renata. "Quick, run home," he shouted without turning around. Renata ran. The dog barked loudly. The girl didn't look back until she found herself on a brightly lit street. She breathed out and slowed down her pace. Raphael saved her. Maybe she shouldn't leave him alone. Perhaps she should call for help. Renata looked around, but there was no one. Everyone had already gone home. The girl had no choice but to go home herself. The next day, Raphael came to school with his left arm bandaged. "What happened to you, dear?" Sonora Sanchez exclaimed sympathetically, raising her hands. "Just a little unpleasant incident," Raphael replied and limped to his seat. "Now he's not just lame," someone chuckled. Renata barely held herself back from turning around. She couldn't lose face in class. Her reputation had to remain unshaken, and the girl stayed silent. Raphael sat down next to her and glanced at her from under his red bangs. Renata pretended not to notice. The usual lesson began. "Don't you even want to thank me?" Raphael wrote on a piece of paper. Renata bit her lip. "Thank you," she wrote back. Raphael smiled. They didn't exchange any more notes. After class, he waited for her at the entrance again. This time, Renata came alone. She was still upset with her friends. Following the girl from school, classmates went out. They watched with curiosity as Raphael, limping, approached Renata. "Do you want me to walk you? What if you encounter that nasty dog again on your way?" Renata didn't want to hurt Raphael's feelings, especially after what he had done for her. But just then, she heard a smirk behind her back. "Look, he's her faithful knight," someone from the class said. "If I show weakness, it's over for me," Renata thought. She raised her head high and replied coldly, "Sorry, but I'm not going the same way as handicapped people." With that, she proudly walked past him, not even sparing Raphael a glance. He remained standing in place, hurt and sad written all over his bewildered face. They never saw each other again. Raphael didn't come to school the next day, or the day after that, or after that. Later, Renata learned that he transferred to another school, but she didn't want to think she was the reason. The girl long remembered the kind red-haired boy and hoped his hand had healed as he drew his magical drawings with it. And then she met Javier and completely forgot about Raphael and everything associated with him. Now, 10 years later, Renata received a message from him. "All this time, I thought Renata Martinez had no heart. Only yesterday, seeing how you helped the old lady, I realized that's not true," he wrote, signing off as Raphael Silvio, whom you once called a handicapped cripple. Renata felt ashamed to recall that episode from her youth. But it was all because of the fears that had haunted her since childhood. Renata sighed and typed in response, "I'm sorry, Raphael. That was very cruel of me. I truly regret it." The reply came almost instantly. "If you want to make it up to me, we could meet tonight. I know your son is sick, and I'd like to help." Reading this, Renata was stunned. How did he know? She hastily texted back, "Of course, I'd appreciate any help." The display almost immediately showed a new message. "Then let's meet at 6:30 in Central Park." Renata calculated the time and distance and replied with a yes. Then she took a shower, got dressed, and headed to the hospital. Walking down the street, Renata was surprised to note that something had changed inside her. With the reappearance of the red-headed Raphael in her life, hope flickered in the girl's heart. Flavio was eagerly awaiting her. She brought his favorite marmalade fruits, milkshake, and marshmallows. The boy eagerly devoured the treats. With his mouth full, he asked his mom about what was happening behind the hospital walls, then turned his attention back to the future. It was the only thing that brought him joy. Flavio dreamed of a future where he would be healthy again. Watching her son, Renata barely held back tears. But she knew she couldn't cry in front of him. She couldn't undermine his faith. She had to be strong. The young woman sat with her son for a long time, and when she left the hospital, she had very little time left to reach the park where she was supposed to meet Raphael. She hadn't taken a leisurely stroll through the city in a long time. She was either rushing to work or going to the hospital to see her son. Now, for the first time in a long while, Renata found herself alone. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and was surprised to find that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The relaxed, serene state of mind had only been a dream to her until now. Renata was enjoying these moments. Somehow, she momentarily managed to forget her troubles. Perhaps it was because of Raphael. After all, he was a memory from her carefree youth. Renata walked leisurely to the park, inhaling the scent of flowers and thinking about the girl she used to be. Finally, she reached the central entrance, where golden lanterns were already lit. Renata smiled. The park seemed so cozy to her. She entered and slowly made her way to the fountain along a wide, colorful tile alley. She still had plenty of time, so she was very surprised when she saw a solitary figure by the fountain. She immediately recognized Raphael by his bright red hair. He also noticed the girl, and getting up from the bench, walked toward her. He still limped, but Renata didn't want to notice that now. She stared intently at his face. What had he become? Was he still the same kind guy he used to be? "Hello, Renata," he murmured, approaching the girl. She immediately recognized his pleasant, low voice. "Hi, Raphael," she replied with a slightly embarrassed smile. The man smiled back. "You called me by my name for the first time," he admitted. The man hadn't changed much. Renata even thought he was wearing the same simple shirt and trousers he wore to school. Of course, that couldn't be true. Raphael had grown up and become even taller, but he hadn't changed his style. They sat down on the bench, but the conversation didn't flow. The past stood between them like a wall. The hurt Renata had caused Raphael seemed to hang in the air. Renata decisively tossed her long hair behind her, as if trying to break the silence. "Raphael, I owe you an apology. My behavior was awful. You saved me from that vicious dog at the cost of yourself, and I was so ungrateful." Raphael silently listened to Renata, tilting his head slightly. "I couldn't draw for a long time," he confessed. "My hand just wouldn't heal." "I'm truly sorry," Renata repeated sincerely. "But why?" Raphael asked after a long silence. Renata looked at him with confusion. "Why did you want to appear cold and arrogant? I could see that deep down, you were different." The man continued his thought. Renata lowered her head. "It's all because of my mother," she said quietly. Raphael raised his eyebrows in confusion. "What does she have to do with this?" The fountain whispered softly behind them. Renata took a deep breath and began to speak. "When my mom was in school, something terrible happened to her. She fell in love with a classmate during her senior year, but he deceived her. It was just a game to him. My mom got pregnant. Luckily, she had a best friend who loved her very much. When he found out, he offered her his hand and heart to save the situation. My mom agreed and married him. Then I was born, and my mom's friend became my father. I didn't know about this until I was 13. But one day, my mom gathered her courage and told me everything. She was very afraid that the same thing might happen to me." Raphael's face tensed. Renata could see it in the bright light of the lanterns. He involuntarily clenched his fists while listening to the young woman. "My mom advised me to behave coldly and aloofly so that no guy would ever dare to approach me closely. That's how I became a queen who should never descend from her pedestal. And then you came along, just an ordinary guy. Queens don't befriend people like you. If I had allowed myself to, I would have turned into a very ordinary girl, and that was dangerous. I really was afraid of repeating my mom's fate." Raphael simply nodded in response. "Now I understand everything," he bitterly replied. "I don't blame you anymore. Everyone has their own story behind them. You did the right thing trying to protect yourself, but fate cannot be escaped, and I still fell in love, head over heels. Even if not with her classmate, though I was luckier than my mom. He turned out to be a decent person," Renata said, but bitterness and sadness echoed in her words. "Are you still with him?" Raphael asked softly, not noticing the disappointed tones in the young woman's voice. "He passed away," Renata said simply. Raphael gently squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Renata nodded silently. "Now I'm very afraid of losing my son," she whispered quietly. Raphael held her hand even tighter. "Renata, I'm sorry, but yesterday I followed you," he confessed. "I was surprised when you entered the hospital building. I thought maybe you work there. I really wanted to find out something about you and your life. Perhaps you've already realized that I haven't forgotten about you." Renata flared up. "I didn't think you still remembered me." Raphael lowered his head in shame. "It seems to me that not a day has passed when I haven't thought of you. Your eyes, hair, smile, all of it has left a permanent mark on my heart," Raphael confessed. Renata looked at him in amazement. "But I don't want you to dwell on that. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I genuinely want to help," he continued. Renata knew Raphael was telling the truth. She listened to him attentively. "Yesterday, I followed you into the hospital and asked about you at the front desk. The receptionist was surprised and reluctant to say anything. But I explained that I'm an old friend of yours and just want to help. Then she almost teared up and told me that your little son is sick." "Yes, Signora Domingo is very kind-hearted and sentimental," Renata acknowledged. After a pause, she added, "But how can you help? If you need money for the operation, I can get it. My friend, he's a wealthy businessman. It's nothing for him," Raphael said. Renata couldn't believe her ears. "Raphael, are you sure?" That's a considerable sum. The man nodded firmly. I'm sure he will help. Renata lit up with happiness and, unable to contain herself, hugged Raphael. Thank you. You're a true angel, my guardian angel. Every time you appear in my life, you save me. Raphael was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Listen, Renata, you must be hungry. I guess you came straight here from the hospital. Let's go somewhere, have coffee and a snack, my treat. Renata looked at Raphael, full of sincere gratitude. Thank you for your care, but I feel terribly uncomfortable. You're doing so much for me. But Raphael just waved it off. It's nothing. He stood up from the bench and offered Renata his hand. She took it, and he helped her up. Then he immediately let go, although his demeanor showed he didn't want to. Renata, however, couldn't think of anything other than her son and the upcoming surgery. She had made it. She was incredibly lucky. How happy Flavio would be. The doctor said that if the surgery was done soon, he would recover quickly and return to normal life. Renata walked through the park beside Raphael, feeling like wings had sprouted behind her. They spent a peaceful and cozy evening in a quiet cafe near the park. Raphael treated Renata to cappuccino and croissants with cream cheese and blueberries. For the first time in a long while, Renata ate with a hearty appetite. Suddenly, she realized she knew nothing about his life. Raph, I'm sorry. I'm such a selfish person. I didn't even ask about how you live and what you do. Raphael modestly cast down his gaze. I'm just an ordinary artist, he said. Oh, that's wonderful, exclaimed Renata. I envy you so much. Envy of the purest kind, of course. I also studied to be an artist, though I never finished college. As she spoke, she swallowed the lump that had formed in her throat. Raphael understood everything and quickly changed the subject. So, what kind of paintings do you create? He asked. Renata shook her head, picking a blueberry from her plate. None at the moment. Before, I used to pour my unfulfilled emotions onto the canvas. Raphael nodded in understanding. He looked at Renata admiringly, love shining in his eyes. But the young woman didn't notice. She was too absorbed in herself. Can I see what you've created? He cautiously asked. Renata shook her head. I sold all my paintings. I was lucky someone was willing to buy them. Raphael sighed. Who was it? A wealthy patron. Singer Silvio Torres. I still have his card. Renata rummaged in her purse and handed Raphael a golden business card. Take it, Raphael. Maybe he'll be interested in your paintings too. You're a wonderful artist. I still haven't forgotten the wolf you drew in your notebook. Raphael smiled and tucked the card into his pocket. Renata was pleased that she could do something for him too. They sat a while longer in the cafe, then Raphael walked her home. Renata worried he might be tired, but he shook his head. My limp doesn't stop me from living a full life. I go hiking and don't deny myself anything, he admitted. Renata smiled. They were already standing at her door. The young woman thanked him for the wonderful evening and his help. My friend will send you a check tomorrow, Raphael said seriously. I know the surgery can't wait. Just give me the address. Renata thanked her old friend once again and wrote down her office address on a piece of paper torn from her notebook. Raphael hugged her goodbye and walked down the street. Renata entered her home, took a hot shower, brushed her teeth, put on her pajamas, and got into bed. For the first time in a long while, she fell asleep instantly in a calm and serene sleep. She dreamt that she, Raphael, and Flavio were driving along the sea in a large, comfortable car. I've never traveled this far before, Flavio confessed with joyful laughter. Raphael momentarily took his eyes off the road to smile at him in the mirror. Renata felt a happy smile on her own face too. With that smile, she woke up 5 minutes before the alarm. Renata quickly got ready and headed to the office. When she entered, the receptionist said there was an envelope for her. Renata's heart pounded heavily. So soon, Raphael seemed like a true magician to her. She took the envelope. Inside was a check for the necessary amount. Excited, the woman hurried to Mr. Gonzalez's office to request a brief leave from work. Upon learning the reason, the boss allowed Renata to take another day off. The young woman practically ran to the hospital. The doctors were pleasantly surprised that she had managed to raise the required amount so quickly. Renata met Flavio and joyfully shared the wonderful news with him. So, will I have the surgery tomorrow? He rejoiced. Then the boy paused for a moment and added anxiously, It won't hurt, right? Don't worry, honey. During the surgery, you'll be asleep and won't feel a thing. Renata sat with her son for a long time. Then she was asked to leave. He needed to be prepared for the operation. Renata was very anxious for the rest of the day. Raphael sent her a message. "Did you receive the check? Is everything okay?" The young woman replied, "Yes, thank you again. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow." Raphael replied that everything would be fine. The next day, Renata was not allowed to see her son before the operation. In the evening, she received a call from the doctor. He said that Flavio was fine. The surgery went more than successfully, and the boy had taken it excellently. "You'll be able to see him tomorrow morning," the doctor said. "He'll be under our observation for another week, and then most likely we'll send him home." "Home? Thank you so much, doctor. This is wonderful news," Renata replied. She felt very light and happy in her heart. She texted Raphael and shared the good news with him. He was very happy for her and asked if she was free in the evening. "Yes," Renata wrote. "I would like to show you something." She read Raphael's message. "Okay," Renata agreed. "I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock if you don't mind," Raphael wrote. "Great, I finish work at that time." "I'll wait for you at the office entrance," the young woman replied. When it was almost 7 o'clock, Renata neatly stacked her papers, stood up from her desk, and walked to the mirror. She didn't know where Raphael would take her. Was this a date? Renata looked at herself. She was wearing a soft blue office blouse and a strict black skirt. She took out lipstick from her purse and applied it to her lips, then combed her long hair. She was ready. As she left the office, she immediately noticed Raphael. He was waiting for her near the parking lot. He wore ordinary trousers and a light shirt with thin stripes. Renata breathed a sigh of relief. He definitely wasn't going to take her to a fancy restaurant. She felt light and happy inside as she approached. Raphael kissed her on the cheek and, taking her hand, led her to the car. Renata looked on in amazement as he opened the door of an expensive black car in front of her. Is this really his car? She wondered but didn't say anything out loud. Raphael drove her through the brightly lit streets of the city and stopped at a bright 4-story building. They got out of the car and took the elevator to the top floor. Renata had no idea where they had arrived, but when Raphael opened the door for her, she smelled the paint. "Is this your studio?" she guessed. Raphael turned on the light, and Renata confirmed she was right. "Yes, this is where I work." "How beautiful!" exclaimed the young woman. Then she noticed something that made her gasp. Renata couldn't believe her eyes. Raphael's studio was filled with her paintings. "But how is this possible? Where did you get them?" "I bought them from your patron," Raphael replied with a smile. Renata thought she had misheard. "Seriously? But where did you get so much money?" Raphael looked into her eyes. "I must confess to you, Renata, I don't have any businessman friend. I was the one who sent you that check." Renata covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. "Yes, I became very wealthy thanks to my canvases. They sell for a lot of money now. I run my own business related to selling art, but I spend most of my time painting." "You are so impressive," Renata said admiringly. "You can also fulfill your dream and continue painting," Raphael said passionately. "I will definitely help you." Renata moved closer. "But why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Raphael looked deeply into her eyes and dared to run his hand through Renata's hair. "Because I love you." With those words, he leaned closer and kissed her. Renata responded to his kiss. Then she realized that her dream about a journey to the sea would definitely come true. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.